Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to be entitled Murder with Messages. I'm going to focus on 4 clandestine service murders that had multiple messages as reported in the national media. However, I want to acknowledge that there are literally hundreds or thousands of clandestine service murders to choose from. And I believe that some of the most important murders are the ones that the national media doesn't discuss at all and has no opinion-based fake news stories. And for example, the murder of William Egan Colby, which one of my channels is named after him, which was performed on April 27th, 1996 by Black Ops, Wet Ops SEAL team at Rock Point, Maryland at approximately 8:30 p.m. after sundown in his kitchen, in his cabin off the Potomac River in Maryland, Rock Point, Maryland. You can Google it. It's in close proximity where John Wilkes Booth, after shooting Abraham Lincoln at the Ford's Theater, rode on horseback about 60 miles south to the area where William Colby's cabin was later built and where William Colby was murdered, I believe, in his kitchen, or he was stun-gunned, neutralized, then taken on a Zodiac boat to another location where he was administered some sort of a poisonous injection, probably between his big toe and his middle toe. So there's no trace of how he died. He went disappearing for 9 days, then reappeared like Houdini on the gravel beach where they found his fiberglass canoe, which he almost never used that canoe, which was filled with sand and rocks. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you is that there's a lot to that murder. I've done numerous videos on the William Colby murder. The media doesn't do any discussions on it. Erin Valente is another example. Erin Valente, age 33, was murdered after she last visited a managing director for the Jerome Kohlberg KKR private bank venture capital firm at 2500 Sand Hill Road. And she was meeting with a Jewish gentleman. He went to Harvard and he had a master's MBA from Stanford University. So he's a Harvard alum. He's Jewish, and he went to Stanford for an MBA, and now he's a big shot for KKR Excel. And that was the last person to see Erin Valente alive before she left his office and could not find her rent-a-car, which was very strange. Then she told her mother on the phone that the navigation system didn't work. She was headed to the San Jose airport to catch a flight home. She never made it, because she ended up in Almaden Valley, which is a good 13 miles further south from the airport where she was headed. She should have been in the airport by 25 minutes or less from Sand Hill Road, but she ended up in Almaden. Her car was found at a place that I basically did the drive from Sand Hill Road, 2500. I did the drive from that location to where her car was discovered with her dead body in the back 5 days later, after she met with the KKR rep. Took me 26 minutes to do that drive. Took me 26 minutes to do that drive. And I did it at the time of day that she would have been driving, which is a Monday afternoon, after 3 p.m. Sometime between 3 p.m. and 3:45 p.m. she would have been at that location. But I don't believe she was. I believe she drove around for 6.5 hours. Anyway, there's no discussion in the national media on that story. She was murdered. They called it a manic episode. It's what the medical examiner of Santa Clara County called it. I'm calling it a clandestine service murder, and every person who works for KKR should be interviewed. And you can throw in Kleiner Perkins too, and you can throw in Sequoia Capital and Doug Leone as well. I'd include Jerome Kohlberg, and I'd include the founders of Kleiner Perkins, and I'd include Don Valentine of the Bronx, except they're all dead. They all died, so I can't interview them. Sequoia Capital brought you FTX, so I figure some of my viewers might be interested in seeing Doug Leone, in a deposition or something of that affair. Or maritime. I kind of prefer the maritime law. You do realize, people, that voting or choosing a candidate is not going to get you out of this war we're in, right? No democracy has ever won a battle or a war. And Ron DeSantis is not going to save the Floridians, okay? He's not the cavalry. He works for Navy intelligence, and he works for maritime law, admiralty law, office of judge advocate. So he's involved in the prisoner dilemma game. He's involved with telling you what you want to hear. He has 3 children and a wife. He has a lot to lose. He's only 44 years old. He is not going to disobey his orders. And he works for a higher authority, which would not be the people who voted for him, okay? Those are the stooges. All right, so William Colby's murder is epically important but not discussed. Erin Valente, age 33, her murder is epically important and not discussed. Her last words spoken were, "It's all a game, it's a thought experiment, we're in the Matrix." Erin Valente, October 7th, 2019, last words spoken. Last seen alive at 2500 Sandhill Road. Right there, where all the clandestine service private bankers are located, and there's a dozen of them at least. But the main ones are Sequoia Capital, KKR, and Klein Perkins. Those are the primary ones. There's a whole bunch of lesser private bankers that operate next to the country club. They have a golf course country club next door, right? You do know that, right? What's it called? I forgot what that stupid country club is called. It's Sandhill. What is it called? Sequoia Heights or something like that. Let me see here. I got it right here. Oh, Sharon Heights. Isn't that disturbing? So there's a golf course country club that's called the Sharon Heights Golf and Country Club that's adjacent to these clandestine service private banks, including, Robert Half, rental employees is there, Altos Ventures, Lightstone Ventures. These are other private investment equity firms. But Sharon Heights reminds me of Sharon Tate. Yeah, it does. And Erin Valente reminds me of Sharon Tate. Yeah, except Erin Valente went to Georgetown University in the swamp, where Paul Pelosi graduated. Georgetown, Jesuit educated. All right, so the murders I am going to focus on, we've all heard about the John Fitzgerald Kennedy murder. That was nationally presented and performed in broad daylight at 12:30 p.m. Dallas, Texas time. It was not televised, of course, and the Zapruder film does not depict what happened. So just forget about that Zapruder film, okay? That's what Oliver Silverstein Stone based his movie on. Remember, JFK, he kept repeating the Kevin Costner character who played Jim Garrison, that John Kennedy's head went back and to the right. Back and to the right. Okay, that's applied linguistics. That's applied linguistics. Okay, the kill shot didn't come from the left and the front. The kill shot came from the triple underpass area, which meant John Kennedy's head went mostly backwards. If it ever went to the right, then that's endangering Jackie Kennedy. So it can't go to the right. It can only go backwards. That film is a mendacity, and you should just tune it out of your brain. That's why they show it. See, if it actually depicted the murder of John Kennedy, it would never be shown. Do you see all of the cameras from the Pentagon of the 9/11 attack? Are they replaying the 270 depictions of something hitting the Pentagon? Are you seeing all the surveillance cameras in the World Trade Center? No, you're not. You're only getting a couple or 0 opportunities to see anything to do with the goings-on at the World Trade Center. And you know they have hundreds of surveillance cameras. So why don't they just play back all the cameras? And there's a reason, is that they don't want you to know what the heck was going on that day, obviously. So the only thing that you see on your mainstream news is mendacity, falsehoods. That's why you watch my channel, because I don't use stupid props like edited films. The second murder is, of course, the Sharon Tate, Abigail, Folger, Leno, LaBianca, NATO M-7 bayonet attacks, 154 bayonet strikes of 7 people. I said 7 people struck with a bayonet. 154 times. Just kind of a high number for one hippie, right? Anyway, that's one that has been presented in the Charlie Manson, not his real name, format, which is complete waste of your time, because that Charles Miles Maddox had nothing to do with NATO or these M7 bayonets, which were used at My Lai. They were used at the Sharon Tate murder scene. It appears now that they were used at the Zodiac third killing of Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa, and was used again in 1969 at the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger on the stage at Altamont Raceway, singing Sympathy for the Devil as Meredith Hunter, age 18, wearing a Dumber Dumber tuxedo, was stabbed with a bayonet. And I'm going to just say it was an M7. I can't prove that, but neither can you. You can't disprove it, because there's no film on that, even though George Lucas apparently was videotaping that murder. But I'll bet you he had a better angle than I had. All right, the other 2 murders I'm going to cover are the Dr. Victor Oda family, whose almost entire family, was slaughtered on October 19th, 1970, as the so-called Manson family trial was going on. It was a Monday afternoon, and I did a video on the Dr. Victor Oda trial. He was an ophthalmologist, and he was a United States Air Force officer. I forgot his rank. He was like a captain, and then anyway, that was in Soquel at 999 North Rodeo Gulch Road. Again, sometime around 5 p.m. is when that happened. It's a very elaborate crime. It must have taken a couple of hours of staging. So it went on into the early evenings. It ended up being a felony arson fire of his Frank Lloyd beautiful house, Ocean View, over Monterey and Carmel and Fort Ord, which are all CIA districts. And my last murder I want to focus on is the Barry and Honey Sherman murder in Toronto, Canada. He was in the drug dealing business, kind of like Paul Pelosi's father was, wholesale generic drugs. They were murdered on, they're not really sure when they were murdered because they weren't found right away. They're estimating they were discovered on December 15, 2017, by the realtor who was showing their home. They had listed that home for sale. They were building a custom home, 10,000 square foot custom home. This home that they were murdered in is about a 9,000 square foot home. And they had listed it for sale, and it was the realtor coming by to show the home to prospective buyers. And she discovered the bodies, which were hung by belts against the railing under underground indoor swimming pool in Toronto, Canada, not too far from Ontario Lake Ontario. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you about that is the media doesn't really cover that story much. They certainly didn't cover the Victor Oda family story, which they did a do-over Charlie Manson narrative and said John Linley Frazier did it, age 24, living in a creek bed. He did it. It's virtually impossible for one person to pull off that murder. It's virtually impossible for one person to pull off the Barry Sherman murder. It was impossible to pull off the John Kennedy assassination with one person. It's impossible to pull off the Sharon Tate, Abigail, Folger, Leno, LaBianca murders with 1 or 2 or 3 persons. You need a dozen to 24 people to pull those off. And in the case of all of these 4 crimes that I'm talking about, 2 of which are widely publicized, JFK and Sharon Tate, and the 2 that are not, which is Victor Oda's family and Barry Sherman, nobody knows anything about those cases. So those 4, what I'm going to do, I don't have time to get into all the minutia details. Minutia meaning in William F. Buckley's definition, it means trivialities that you don't need to know about. In my vernacular, minutia means critically important details which will help you understand what happened. Minutia is key. And that's why my videos run so long. It's not that I like to hear myself talk, as some of my trolls like to say my comments are asinine. That's not a comment. The fact is I'm into minutia. I'm an auditor. The person who trolls me wouldn't know, how to do a bank reconciliation. They're incompetent. They don't know anything about minutia because they have ADD. The knucklehead that trolled me, he has ADD. He can barely complete. It's like a major thing to do a whole sentence. So what I want to tell you is that, take your Ritalin and double down on your amphetamines so that you can understand what I'm saying for you ADD challenged people. I'm not against ADD. It's just that when I get trolled by them, I get really angry. All right, what I wanted to tell you about JFK is that there are multiple messages there. So the first message is to all the fake leaders of the world, to the Ron DeSantis's and to the Gavin Newsoms and to the Dianne Goldman Feinstein, and to the the fake leaders of Denmark, for example. Denmark, which is part of the European Union, they have no sovereignty. Denmark borrows money from the bank. They run a deficit in Denmark. Denmark has no sovereignty and has no fiscal responsibility, just like the United States. Only I think the United States is the greatest example of financial irresponsibility, and yet here we are with the biggest army on the planet Earth. Except that it doesn't really belong to us. It belongs to the banks. The people who finance those satellites above and those vaxes, they control the United States of America. They control Glacier National Park, Yosemite. That's their property. And Bill Gates' money doesn't belong to Bill Gates. It belongs to the bank. And Jeffrey Bezos and his ex-wife, they don't have any money. It belongs to the bank. You try going down and getting your money out of the bank if you had $1 billion. You know how many armies of bankers you'd have to go to pretty please with sugar on top to get $100,000 in $20 bills? Forget about it. Take a month. So the JFK sent a message to any fake leader who went off script and disobeyed their orders and didn't read the CIA clandestine service banker-funded program for their countries or states, which are districts. They're banking districts. So that was the first message. The second message was to all the private, sniveling bankers that, hey, we could do this to you too. It's just that we don't usually do it in such a public forum. There weren't that many witnesses of the John Kennedy assassination. There were probably 80 witnesses at the most. The other 20 or 30 people that were present, they all worked for CIA, FBI, Secret Service, clandestine services. They were all part of the coordination team to make sure that John Kennedy didn't get out of Dealey Plaza alive. There's a whole backup group of people who could have killed John Kennedy if for some reason the rifle shooters couldn't do it. And a lot of the people associated with that operation were later murdered. Over 500 people who are associated with the John Kennedy assassination were years later suicided, murdered, disappeared, including E. Howard Hunt's wife, Dorothy Wetzel Hunt, which nobody seems to know. She paid the rifle shooters for JFK, and she paid for the listening devices for the Watergate burglary installations. And she was murdered in an airplane crash in Chicago. And you should know that the other message would be to the clandestine service soldiers themselves to make sure that they follow their oath of obedience and oath of secrecy, because what happened to John Kennedy can happen to any member of the clandestine armies. See, so you got a message to the fake leaders of the world, you got a message to the sniveling private bankers who don't even trust themselves, to see how omnipotent these perverts are in a conference room when they push the button on someone. So the fake leaders got a message, and the bankers got a message, and the clandestine soldiers like William Colby got a message. Later years, William Colby gets murdered, assassinated himself. Anyway, so those three. And then, after you're done with those three very important people who run our world, then you can throw it out to the peasants who some vote and some don't vote. Some are registered to vote, some aren't. And they're the most unimportant part of the equation is the sheeple. It's just giving them a sense of hopelessness that this vibrant 46-year-old president had his head blown off while he's sitting next to his beautiful wife, Jacqueline Bouvier, holding a dozen red roses, and it's not Valentine's Day. It's the Thanksgiving holiday week. Why doesn't Jackie have yellow roses? You know, the national flower for Texas is the yellow rose of Texas. So don't you think that was a message that Jackie Kennedy got when she got off the airplane at Love Field? Handed a dozen red roses, right? That's a signal. That's a message. I don't know if you got that message. She should have been handed a dozen yellow roses. So I don't know what was going through Jackie Kennedy's mind as they went down past Neiman Marcus on Main Street. And then past that, they make this bizarre right-hand corner onto Houston Street, where Clint Hill, her personal bodyguard, drops off the bumper right then. That should have scared the heck out of you. I would have jumped out of the car. If your Secret Service agent is bailing, that's never good. Jack Kennedy, his Secret Service agent that would have blocked any shots coming from behind, he dropped off at the Love Airport, where he was called off. He was ordered off the bumper. So anyway, the kill shot came from the front. So John Kennedy would have been dead whether these imbecile cohort Secret Service agents were present or not. Probably they would have been hit with rifle fire. So I think that's why they belong to the Self-Preservation Society. All right, so we all know about Jack Kennedy, and that's multiple messages. That's a message to the fake leaders. It's a message to the private perverted bankers to show how omnipotent they are. It's a message to the clandestine soldiers, most of whom work for CIA, but they work for the mafia. You know, Johnny Roselli, Frank Sturgis, whose real name is Frank Fiorini, you know, the Bay of Pigs people, the Carlos Marcello people, the Sanchez Tropicante people, the Sam Giancani people. Those are all part of the clandestine soldiers, and they all got the JFK message, including Fidel Castro. He got it too, because he's a fake leader of Cuba, right? And then we had the message to the general population, who's the least important people to get the message, but they have the largest base. All right, so that's that. So then we move on to the Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, private banker, Tom Kummer, who you think is Jay Sebring, and Voytek Frykoski, who's a Polish-Jewish man, who's the controller for Abigail Folger, control agent for her. He's a Polish-Jewish guy. And then we have Stephen Parent, who's an 18-year-old homosexual boy, burglar, who likes to do purloin radios from his employer. Anyway, he's heading over to see a older homosexual man by the name of Donald Gerard in Van Nuys, who's a scriptwriter for the William Shatner Star Trek series. He wrote Trouble with Tribbles. If you remember the episode of Trouble with Tribbles, that was the gay man who had a date with Stephen Parent, who could not get through the gate at Cielo Drive because the electric motor had been disabled by the NATO soldiers who are wielding M16 rifles with M7 attachments. And Stephen Parent received 1 bayonet strike and 4 M16 rifle shots to his chest and arm. So who are the messages in the Sharon Tate murders and Leno LaBianca? Okay, the same people that JFK's messages were headed to. Number one, it was to the private bankers who finance everything to do with Hollywood social engineering and politics. That includes the Tom Bradley mayoral campaign. That means Evel Younger, who's the OSS alumni district attorney of Los Angeles. That means the mayor of Los Angeles. That means Ronald Reagan, who's the governor of California. The fake governor of California is Ronald Reagan. He is part of the messaging of the murder of Sharon Tate, who's a personal friend of Art Linklater, who is a personal friend of Ronald Reagan. And Abigail Folger, her murder is a message to all the private bankers that went to the Catholic indoctrination schools like Santa Catalina Academy or like the Patricia Hearst schools. Patricia Hearst also went to high school at Santa Catalina Academy. She went to the Crystal Springs Upland School for middle school, where she met her fiance, Stephen Weed. Anyway, it was a message to all those nobility class people like Enos Mejia in Pacific Heights, and to Nancy and Paul Pelosi in Presidio Heights, and to Diane Goldman Feinstein in Presidio Heights, all of whom they all moved over to Pacific Heights in later years. They were only in their early 30s, 29 years old in the Pelosi's, and Diane Feinstein is like 37 years old at that time. And so they're young, and they're getting this message that we can whack the president. And I think we all know that they whacked the mayor of San Francisco, didn't they? George Moscone. They whacked Harvey Milk and George Moscone just about a week after they whacked Jim Jones, who was a personal friend of Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi, and George Moscone, and Harvey Milk, and John Burton, and Philip Burton, and Barbara Boxer. Who am I leaving out here? Oh, and Enos Mejia, and Timothy Leary. He knew all those people. So I think they all got the message when you kill Abigail Folger, who's the daughter of your banker, don't you think? So, message to the bankers, a message to all the Hollywood elite, which are mostly Jewish people. They did kill Voytek Frykoski. He is Jewish. So they got a message, which is, hey, we can come over to your house. I mean, you guys have all done porn films over here at Cielo. It's a military house. And houses, plural. Houses, plural. Because the clandestine services must own 30 or 40 houses in Benedict Canyon. It's not just a one-trick pony show. They just don't own that one house. They own everything around it, and they own everything above it, too. Because the Paul Allen of Microsoft Land Trust owns, this, what's called, I forgot the name of it. They have a name. The beautiful meadow below Mulholland Drive, but above the Sharon Tate murder scene. Paul Allen's trust owns that land. It's a really large piece of property. It's being developed with mega mini mansions. Mini meaning like, under 20,000 square foot. So the other messages were to the clandestine soldiers that worked in the drug business in San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles and the Santa Monica, Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Silver Lake districts, Wilshire, Culver City area of Los Angeles. The Straight Satan's Motorcycle Club dealt drugs throughout the greater Los Angeles area. The Satan Slaves dealt drugs in San Fernando Valley. But Leno LaBianca handled private banking for drug sales using his five grocery stores. They had 11, and they sold 6. And they had 5. He had 11 racehorses, too. He had sold 2 and put 1 down, leaving 8 at the time of Leno LaBianca's 10 bayonet strikes to his chest. He had 8 racehorses, but he owned 11 originally, and he had 11 racehorses and he had 11 grocery stores, but he sold 6 grocery stores and he sold 2 horses and he put 1 down because it broke his leg. Because those horses are all on drugs, right? You realize when you bet on the ponies, you're betting on doped ponies. So they don't feel any pain, that's why they break their legs. They break their legs because they don't feel any pain or discomfort when they step into a pothole, and that's how they fracture their legs. It's not the drugs that kill them, it's the drug numbness that kills them. All right, then the final message, 4 months after those murders, the police did a pretty excellent job investigating them, except they had no chance because the murderers are all flown in from Europe and they're NATO soldiers. So the Los Angeles Police Department does not have the authority to fly to Belgium and all the NATO countries to conduct interviews. They don't have the budget and they don't have the authority to do that. So they were never, ever, ever going to catch the killers. Nevertheless, they did identify many CIA operatives in the drug business and in the clandestine service businesses in and around Benedict Canyon, Laurel Canyon, San Fernando Valley, and the Silver Lake area, including burglaries, phony fake identifications, CIA apartment buildings where people were kept rent-free, And the Los Angeles police did really an excellent job of that. But they were shunted aside 4 months into the investigation. And Evel Younger and Paul Caruso, who's a Beverly Hills mob lawyer, they took over and they said he did it. It was Charles Miles Maddox. He did it. And he's up in CIA China Lake, where they mine uranium. You know, the Meyer and Barker Ranch is a uranium mine, right? CIA property. And then everything was about the Charlie Manson cult family, which had nothing to do with NATO murder. So the messages were to the Hollywood elites, to the private bankers, through the using Sharon Tate to send the message to the Hollywood people, using Abigail Folger to send the message to the State Department and private banking people, using Leno LaBianca to send a message to the private banking people and the drug distribution people. And then after those 3 messages were sent, then they used the Manson mendacity as a general psyops for everyone that watched television and read newspapers and reads fake books like Helter Skelter, written by a CIA author, Kurt Gentry, not written by Vincent Bugliosi, who's just a lowlife loser, stalker of his milkman, and creep of a husband. All right. Then we have the Victor Oda family, which was murdered during the testimony of one of the jailbirds who said that Susan Atkins said that Charlie Manson said to go kill people in Benedict Canyon. On that very afternoon, which was the 19th of October, 1970, Dr. Victor Oda's coming home from work early because he has a fundraising dinner down the hill from 999 North Radio Gulch Road at the Dominican Hospital. He and his wife are on the fundraising committee there, and they have an appointment for a dinner party, and so they're coming home a little early. So he's coming home around 5 o'clock, and the dinner, I'm assuming, is at 6:30, so he's going to freshen up, and then they're going to head down the hill. But he ends up running into some military soldiers, I believe, and they use scarves in his dresser drawer. He never wore ties, he wore scarves. His wife bought him scarves. So there's a lot of intel involving the murder of the Victor Oda family. The murderers knew who he was. They had dossiers on he and his wife and his children. He had 4 children. 2 of the children went to the Santa Catalina school where Patty Hearst went. One of them was Patricia Hearst's classmate, Lark. The older daughter, Tara, had just graduated, and was in New York City. So she was not going to be killed because she was in New York City. Thank you, New York. And Lark was staying overnight in Monterey at the Santa Catalina school. So she didn't get killed because she didn't come home. It's not that far. I mean, that's a 25-minute drive to get to Lark. But she was not present. But Dr. Victor Oda's secretary receptionist, Dorothy Cadwaller, was. She's 38 years old. She's a mother of 2 daughters herself. And she had picked up Taggert or can't remember the other child's name. Anyway, Dr. Victor Oda had 4 children. 2 of them were home, his 2 sons, which are the 2 youngest children. And his wife, Virginia, is home. And they're shot in the back of the head with a .38 caliber pistol. They have the scarves around their eyeballs so they didn't see it coming. They're then tossed into the swimming pool of this Frank Lloyd Wright house. There's a cat. They have a kitty cat. The cat is shot and thrown into the pool. Dorothy Cadwaller has a scarf around her head. She also has her hands tied in front of her with a scarf. And she's shot in the back of the head with a .38 one time and thrown into the pool. So that's 5 human beings in the pool plus 1 kitty cat. Why don't you think the media would report that story? It took the Sheriff's Department of Santa Cruz County 4 days to make an arrest of this guy living in a creek bed, former automobile mechanic, John Lindley Frazier, age 24. He did it, and then the district attorney took it from there, and they just photocopied and pasted everything from the Charlie Manson case, and they applied it to him, that he did all this by himself. Only he didn't have Susan Atkins and Patricia Krenwinkel or Leslie Van Houten to help him. He just did it all by himself. That involves driving the maroon-colored Rolls-Royce and parking at the base of the driveway, blocking any cars like the fire department. Then driving Dorothy Cadwaller's, no, scratch that, Virginia Ohta's Lincoln Continental town car and parking that in a similar pattern as the maroon-colored Rolls-Royce, which there was a maroon Rolls-Royce in a Columbo episode starring Robert Conrad, where he played a felonious, fraudulent, selling gym memberships. Milo Janis, the Milo Janis franchises. Anyway, so you see the Columbos come in and out of these CIA events a lot. And then you have to believe he typed up a manifesto like Ted Kaczynski in the typewriter, and then folded it and placed it in the windshield wiper blades of the maroon-colored Rolls-Royce. Then set a staged arson fire and burned the house to the ground and escaped without being seen by the neighbors. All by himself. It's impossible. Could never happen. All right, my last murder is the Barry and Honey Sherman murder. That, again, they think it occurred on December 13th, 2017. The bodies were discovered by his listing agent, realtor. Well, scratch that. I don't know that it was his listing agent. It was a realtor that had access to the lockbox that was showing the property. It was a realtor. It doesn't necessarily mean it was Barry and Honey's listing agent. But anyway, on December 15th, 2017, their bodies were found downstairs in the indoor swimming pool, hung, kind of garroted with belts attached to the railings, in a semi-seated position, staged, clearly. The medical examiner believes they were killed in another room upstairs in the house and then carried down to the pool, which nullifies the concept of a suicide, right? Torpedoes that. It's professional and it's a team. And I'm not going to get into all the different possible motives there for killing Barry Sherman, who's Jewish, and his wife's Jewish. She's the queen of the Jewish charity community in Toronto, Canada. Toronto, Canada is a CIA city, if you don't know. It's like San Francisco. It's a high concentration. It's not an accident that Jim Carrey and Neil Young and Stephanie Powers and all of these movie stars like Mike Myers, who plays Austin Powers wearing the Roman Polanski Edwardian costume. It's not an accident that he came out of Toronto. That's a CIA city. And Barry and Honey Sherman are up to their eyeballs with clandestine services in the drug business. If you're in the drug business, you're working with the CIA. Just like Carlos Marcello was. Just like Paul Pelosi's father probably was, right? And so was Barry Sherman. And that's who killed him. It's not political per se. Are there political reasons to take him out? Yeah, there were. Absolutely, there were. He had a lot of enemies. But you don't have the authority. You have to go to the highest authority, which would be a bank. So a bank would sanction the hit on John Kennedy. A bank would sanction the hit on Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger and Leno LaBianca. A bank would sanction the hit on Dr. Victor Oda and his whole family and stage it in a macabre way. And a bank would hang Sharon Tate by a rope and attach it to Jay Sebring to send out some kind of a message to some people that think that maybe it's a satanic ritual. Hey, it's a clandestine service murder. They do a lot of mixed messaging things, including misspelling the word helter skelter. They call it helter skelter. But this Barry and Honey Sherman was a clandestine service, like Navy SEAL team that did this hit. And of course, no one has ever been caught. In the case of all of these murders, the murderers were never caught. The real murderers were never caught. Yes, they convicted John Linley Frazier and they sent him to the Mule Creek prison where Charlie Watson was convicted of the Sharon Tate murder, and that's where he was, and that's where they sent Lyle Menendez, who did not kill his parents, and that's where they sent him. So it looks like Mule Creek, Ione, near Sacramento, that's where you send the scapegoats. That's where they sent John Linley Frazier, who was wrongfully convicted of the Victor Oda murder, and that's where they sent Charlie Watson, who never went by Tex. Just get that Tex out of your brain. Nobody called Charlie Watson Tex, except the media. Okay? And the crisis actors. The crisis actors called him Tex. The people who were his friends and played football with him, They called him Charlie. But you can't have a Charlie in a story where you already have a Charlie Manson because it screws up the story. You can't have two Charlies. Yeah, the judge is named Charlie, the cult leader is Charlie, and then the killer's got to be, named something different than Charlie. There's too many Charlies in the story, right? There's 3 Charlies in the Manson story. The judge, the cult leader, and then the bayonet wielder. But there's no bayonet. They never found the murder weapon. The bayonet leader with no bayonet. Then we have, no one was convicted in the Barry and Honey Sherman. No one was arrested. No one was arrested in the John F. Kennedy case. I mean, they arrested Lee Oswald, and then he gets put down, under 72 hours after his arrest by Jacob Rubenstein, a Jewish man from Chicago, Cicero. All right, that's my story. Those are my messages. It goes to the bankers. It goes to the clandestine service supervisor level. It goes to the crisis actors in the field. It goes to the friends and family of the victim. And it then goes to the general public. But in the case of Victor Oda and the case of Barry Sherman, the public really hasn't been abused with those murders. So I contrasted. I had 4 murders. 2 were presented over the last 50 to 60 years as psych ops, which is John F. Kennedy and Sharon Tate. And then the other 2 are basically nobody but me knows about them. Thanks for listening. Please hit the like and subscribe, and we'll talk soon.